Tuesday, March 11th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. The provincial government wants to transform and modernize the education system in this province. So far, we have an interim report from the folks behind the Education Accord. The final one is due at the end of the month. Today, we ask, what are your thoughts on the education system in this province? So when we say Education Accord, we're talking it will be a 10-year roadmap for the education system. And that current system, and not to bring everyone down here, but the current system and everything I'm pulling on right now is from the interim report, right? So we've got chronic absenteeism, lack of engagement. The province has one of the lowest adult literacy rates in Canada. Learners, educators, and parents are all concerned about the reported levels of violence and bullying in schools. There are mental health challenges which impact educators and learners who spend an increasing amount of time focused on mental health issues and less time teaching and learning. We've got low academic achievement. Newfoundland and Labrador students scored below the Canadian average in mathematics, reading, and science. And institutions are challenged to incorporate Indigenous perspectives, knowledge, and practices into education due to long-standing systemic barriers. That's just a few things. There's more in the interim report. But and also, I will say there's obviously a ton of great work being done in and around the system by teachers, administrators, but what we're talking about today, it's a system fix and a roadmap to modernize where we are and to meet national standards and maybe even surpass them and to go beyond. So we are opening the phone lines today. I'm going to have a little chat with my two guests here. But again, the question for you, what are your thoughts on the education system in this province? Do you have questions or comments for the co-chairs of the Education Accord? Thoughts on transforming and modernizing the education system? Those numbers to call if you want to join us: 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. The text line is open, 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. Both co-chairs are here with me in the studio. Anne Burke, professor in literacy, education, and digital learning at Memorial University's Faculty of Education, among other things. Karen Goodnough, national and international scholar and former dean of the Faculty of Education at Memorial University. I picked just the top lines off your bios because they're rather lengthy, but welcome back to the show. How are you both doing?
Doing well. Thank you, Adam.
Great. Thank you.
We did a show before, right? We're talking about the Education Accord, and then we talked about you doing that first draft of it and looking ahead to the end of this month for when the final one gets handed in. Once the interim report was out into the world, what were what's the range of reaction that you've heard from folks?
Well, it's been varying.
Yeah.
A lot of folks came forward and said that, I really like how this has been presented and written because it really does identify what the issues are currently that we're facing within our education system. A lot of folks actually read through and said, I never thought of it that way. That's a different way to put it. There were others that came forward and said that I really wish that my voice was more represented. These are some ideas, and, this is what I would like to see to make impact and change. So they were varying, and they were, we did have a variety of voices across from written submissions to presentations, but also, Karen, from the survey.
Yeah, we had a fairly robust response to our survey, close to 6,000 individuals, which range from students, K-12 students, post-secondary students, the general public, parents, all types of educators in the system. And, of course, there are a range of questions, and not everyone answered every question. But very strong themes emerged from the survey.
Right. So you got all that. You're working on the final one. But, okay, before I get to, I'm just thinking through my head here, briefly, why is this so important for each of you individually? I would like to establish that again before we get into everything else we're going to get into. Why is this important for you personally to do this?
Well, I'll start then. I've been an educator for 40 years. I started my career as a high school science teacher, junior high teacher, and did that for several years before, working also in post-secondary as an instructor and then becoming a professor. So, it's about commitment to effecting change and positive change. And ultimately, it's the You might call them in some professions client. Ultimately, it's the student, the learner that we want to support. So it's for me, it's a lifelong commitment to supporting the learner, but also looking at education from an ecological perspective and how we might consider all factors that influence how people learn and how they can be supported in their learning.
And why for you?
I think for me, I mean, I'm like Karen. I had a number of years that I've taught across Canada as well as in this province. And for me, I mean, as an educator, I mean, there were many times when I felt frustrated because I could not address what students' needs were. There were times when I went home on a Friday afternoon worried about children. There were times when I finished the school year hoping that they would be able to, someone would take care of them because I knew at times that their needs were not being met. One of the things that for me, when I had the early conversation about becoming a part of the team for the Accord, was to think about what do social determinants mean? Like, you know, what are the factors that teachers can only influence so much? And what is missing and what supports need to be in place so that you can address what students' needs are? So that was one. The other was, you know, I do a lot of research in this area, you know, and looking at learning environments, thinking about literacy and what that means for change in a student's life, whether, you know, for themselves, mobility, being able to take care of themselves. So all of those things are part of the reason why that I want to become part of the Accord. But for me, it's about the public engagement and stakeholder discussions and bringing those in as community.
We've got an outgoing premier. There's going to be a new one, right? We got two folks running for that position, and then at some point, come fall, a provincial election. So you've got that happening. Then, when at the launch of this, the PC opposition said, "Hey, this is just another report. We've had reports, right?" How are you feeling around the political landscape changing from the promise and the mission you had to where you are right now? Because has there been any communications that this will be followed through? Are they going to land this helicopter, or will this be, like some worries are, just another report?
Karen, would you like to be?
We're optimistic, even though things are in turmoil at the moment, and there are unknowns.
Yeah.
We're optimistic that a new premier will continue to support the Accord. We haven't actually had any in-depth conversations about this, but you have to consider once you do see the final report, and many of the calls to we're calling them calls to transformation. When you see a lot of the calls or recommendations, you'll also become apprised of many of them are in action already. They're not all going to be new. There are many positive things happening. So I'm assuming that we will build on what's already been done and move forward, hopefully, with many of the new actions that will need to be implemented to improve our system.
What happens if it is shelved?
It won't be shelved.
It might, but and I know we were talking, and I appreciate the optimism, and yes, that's a hypothetical. But at this moment,
Right.
if these plans, if they're like, you know, thank you, and the stuff that's already in action, we'll continue on with that a bit. But this whole thing, like the Moya Green report is coming to mind right now. Right, a couple of things made it through, a lot of stuff did not. What does that mean for the education system in this province if a 10-year roadmap is shelved?
Adam, there's a lot of groups here that have spent a lot of time and energy and given us input, and we've had rich discussions about what needs to happen. So, you know, we always have that tool of advocacy and putting pressure on government. I mean, we have to use that to affect change. We cannot afford to let this report sit on the shelf.
There was some education, it's being paused right now, changes to the curriculum for junior high around French, music, art, social studies. We did a show on it. There were a lot of calls, and the government hit pause. The discussion, though, was about engagement, right? And there's a lot of stuff about the lack of engagement in your interim report. Did you know this were you consulted on this? And in a time of an education accord, and with all those voices being looked at things like engagement, what was that follow through like, or do you have any comment on it?
I think that I will say that we were not part of that discussion. That work happened before we arrived, and that we became, found out about the actual release at the same time as the public did.
What does that say to you about the importance of your role if you weren't consulted at all?
I think it speaks to operating in silos and the need for greater collaboration, more effective communication within government, but also between government, NL schools, community partners. I mean, there are some very strong partnerships in existence, but we definitely need, and this has been a robust theme in all the feedback we've gotten and the discussions we've had, there has to be better communication and developing shared goals to get to where we want to go.
And one of the things, too, when we met with you last, we talked about that interagency communication. So we met with departments, and this has been a very robust public engagement, stakeholder-driven, initiative. So there's many voices here that have come forward, and that's the reason why that I believe it won't be shelved, because all of those people have a stake. All those people have made contribution, and I think this really will be much better for our province.
But just to note too, Adam, that recently the Department of Education has incorporated NL schools as a division. So this is new. So they're integrating. As you know, there are growing pains when new processes are put in place. So it will take some time for them to improve their communication and their operations and their practices as well for the benefit of everyone.
Do you have concern about the work you're doing? Because once the toothpaste is out of the tube, there's not much you can do, right? You're putting together recommendations, but then when you look at, again, like this junior high example, an outcry around what do you mean you think this will fix student engagement, and then the pause button. But that's in a time of an education accord. That was what was decided as to look into a possible route forward for engagement. Do you worry that folks won't kind of do all their homework around this and read between the lines, or read the actual lines of what's in the final report for putting it out there into the public for a 10-year plan?
I think people will be very keen to see what we have in the report, and they will scrutinize it and analyze it and reflect on it. I'm convinced that, and this will be great because that's what we want people to do.
We do. We want them to be part of the voice here.
And what can we, there's a call line growing here, but before I switch over, what can folks expect to see? I know, March 31st, you hand it in, and then the government has a look at it, and then there'll be, I'm assuming, some kind of press conference or something. But what can you say about what the final report will kind of be like from as you release it into the world?
Well, I will say that it's composed of a number of themes. So it does build from the interim report. Yeah. But what's very important about this is that there's pathways to action. Yes. And what that means is that there's steps of implementation. So we haven't just made suggestions and worked along with, these many, many people in putting this together, but there actually is an actionable plan that can be put in place to actually bring this to fruition.
So yeah, it's the 10-year roadmap, right?
Yeah, the 10-year roadmap has short-term, mid-term, long-term goals, and they are very specific. So we did that purposely to make sure that, hey, here's your roadmap. Let's see where we go from here.
Okay. Thanks for that. You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today we're talking about the future of education, of the system from before kindergarten all the way up to adult, later in life learning, the future of the education system in Newfoundland and Labrador. I've got the Education Accord co-chairs as my guests, and Burke and Karen Goodnough here with me in studio. We're taking calls, right? So it's either if you want them to know something, or if you got questions about it, or if you've got thoughts on the future of education and perhaps what may need to change for Newfoundland and Labrador, the lines are open. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206, thesignal@cbc.ca for emails. And I know this is a passionate issue with a bunch of folks, obviously, because it's about the future of education for Newfoundland and Labrador, but just, remember, we're all talking to people here as we go through this. I'll just put that out so everyone can hear if you're considering calling. Let me see. Call list. We got a couple people on it. We got Sue Rose is on the line. Hi, Sue. How you doing?
Hi, I'm I'm very eager to speak about this. Obviously, Adam, you know who I am and the work that I've
Yes,
been
yes.
doing, and sort of retired. I'm just going to throw out. It's interesting. I love their optimistic view, but I'm just going to throw out some things because many educational reports have been done in the past 12 years. Most of being ignored. I'm just going to throw out some things. Being an advocate, a human rights advocate, particularly in education. Dealing with parents from all over the province and all over Canada and the National Education Committee I'm on. The big thing is that we have no accountability in our schools. The issue is, and I'll talk about Dr. Gerald White, who is a researcher and did a lot of work on school bullying and linking it to adult mental health issues. He was let go from government because we began starting to talk about these statistics. There's lots of issues, and I'm just going to start with one. We have nowhere for ADHD students, very little programming. If you're lucky to get the proper programming, it's a hit or a miss. We have no programming for autistic children. Our classrooms in kindergarten are made up of kids with ADHD, with autism, and regular kids. So kids that are out of control in their classrooms begin to develop anxiety by the end of kindergarten. And hence, this just grows and grows and grows. Teachers are dealing with all of these issues in a classroom, and they're not trained in any of it. And I'm going to talk just briefly. This is well known. This has been documented. CBC themselves did it about 10 years ago. Had teachers on and parents talking about the issues in education. This is nothing new. Unless we have an independent, not associated, like the Child Youth Advocate, that will take on a role of ensuring that the various needs of students are met. Don't forget, that's one thing I'm talking about. That's never been dealt with.
So you're calling for like an education advocate, hey?
Yes, an education that's desperately needed. Just Google the Human Rights Commission. See how many parents try to get there because they're so desperate. Kids are dropping out in elementary. This is a huge problem, and government is very aware of these problems. Government is also aware that we do not have the expertise to deal with these different types of kids in regular classrooms. The other issue is if you've got a kid with a behavioral issue in kindergarten, they stay in school. The only thing that happens in that classroom is kids become more and more anxious. Unless you have teams in school consisting of social workers to deal with the parents and kids, there's times that kids need to be removed. If behaviors are that out of control, like smearing feces on the wall, the call I got a while ago, happening in schools, the kid was never expelled. This is not a kid that. So I'm going on and on because there are so many issues.
No, go ahead. But yeah, well, because there's a lot, so I'll put some of that. But wrap it down or up, and then I'll put it to my guests.
Yeah.
Sure.
We have to have an educational advocate. Yeah. That's the only way forward. And we have to be accountable. And if we have principals, the only way schools are surviving is because of leadership in schools. Nobody is monitoring that. We could have a principal that's terrible and creating violence in schools. So with no one monitoring, so an educational advocate is essential. Until we get that, we're not going to change anything. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sue. I always appreciate your calls and your expertise and your lived experience on all of this. So Sue Rose calling there, Brock of Blackhead. Let me put it to, so a lot there, right? Calls for an education advocate, talk about behavioral issues, challenges, struggles in schools. Where does this fit into the work you're doing and the recommendations that we're going to be hearing from you at the end of the month?
Well, I'd just like to thank the caller for sharing with us. And she's presented a very complex ball, I'll say.
Yeah, and Sue Rose, you've heard about Sue before, right? Yeah,
yes,
of course. Yeah.
A very complex scenario, which really does exist. And I'll just pick away at a few of the things she mentioned. We wholeheartedly agree that we do need an education advocate. Absolutely. We do agree. It's something we've talked about, we've discussed. She referred to the composition Really, it's about composition of students in classrooms. And sometimes some classrooms and teachers are dealing with classrooms that have very high needs students. So that links to then our wraparound supports and having teams of care, teams in schools, made up of a diverse group of individuals, professionals who can support our students and teachers and administrators. Sue said that we haven't acted on any previous reports. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. We have acted on many recommendations in some previous reports. I'll refer to Alice Collins' report. That
When we say we, who do you mean?
I'll say government.
Okay.
Government.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say we because I'm not part of government.
Yeah.
I'm doing this at the bequest of government, but I'm not employed by government.
Yeah.
So government has enacted many of the recommendations in Now is the Time, which was led by Alice Collins. That was released in 2017. And we're seeing some of those things in action now. Are they perfect? No. Do we have a system that's dynamic? We do. And we always have to be working diligently and being responsive. Accountability. I agree. We have to build in much more accountability on many levels in terms of reporting, communicating with parents, holding teachers accountable, holding students accountable. I agree. It's very complex. I'll let Anne pick up
Yeah, go for it.
a lot of those issues.
Thank you, Sue, for calling, because I think what you've really talked about is really the basic human right of children. Often, children don't necessarily others speak for them, and they cannot speak for themselves. So I think it's most important that in this accord that we begin to address what their needs are to see how we can make their lives much better in the schooling system. I do know Gerald White's work in regards to anti-bullying because I have done some work actually with the Anti-Bullying Centre at the Dublin City University, and they were engaged in the Accord actually through presentations and consultation on what does anti-bullying mean and what is it that we need to step forward. One of the things that they did take into account, and it's really a different philosophy, I guess, in understanding about the social determinants of learning. One of the things that teachers we have really coped, or I guess struggled with, is understanding how is it that we can make difference. There's many things like, Adam, we spoke earlier about, housing, having supportive relationships. All of these things really are about how a student arrives, at the school door and what coping skills or what do they actually have in their backpack. And that's something that we have to start thinking about because all of that impacts what happens in the classroom. And even at that early age in kindergarten, we are hoping that as we begin to move forward, that we're looking at social connections and the way that we can connect with communities. So even starting in Kinderstart and in the early childcare, programming, we'll look at how parents can connect with schools, but also that connection about what the child's needs are. So those early interventions, as we talk about, what does it mean? Does your child need a speech pathologist or occupational therapist or whatever that is, will come much earlier and identifying those students. So when they do come to the kindergarten classroom, supports are in place. So that was one of the things. And I don't want to talk a little bit longer because I know there's other questions, Adam, but I really want to talk about wraparound services. I think in looking about
Wraparound supports, right?
Yes.
And I've done so many shows and not on education,
Yes.
where wraparound supports come up from housing and homelessness,
Yep.
healthcare, mental health challenges, you name it, and as it intersects with the social determinants of health, massive stuff. So please, wraparound
Sure.
supports, yeah.
So wraparound supports are about how we integrate, education, social needs, and health services together. And in our discussions, we talked about a health navigator or a navigator at a school to help parents. Often, there's a discussion that takes place with the teacher, and it might be like, your child is experiencing this, and then they go away, see their doctor, and then they're on a waiting list. There's no one to help them, immediately. So we are looking to place navigators within schools, social workers that can help to address those things. Parents are often at a loss as well, but I appreciate where Sue's coming from because at the time when this child is trying to find their way in the classroom, there are another 20 children that are struggling as well. So we have to think about what those needs are, and the needs vary from school to school depending on the school, but also thinking about how we're going to address those needs so that, schooling becomes much easier for all of the children and everybody benefits.
I will say this. I really I know once the final report's in, you're probably going to have to take a breather, but I do want you back, both of you back in here. If you will come back to talk about the final report, I just want to put that in your ears now because it is very important to have that conversation as well. And I appreciate you both doing the first one, this one, and I'll appreciate in advance the third one. Let's go back to the phone lines. We've got Daryl on the line from St. John's. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, yes, a lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's yes. I mean, this whole thing, from reading it to talking about it and to thinking about changes and where we are. You're right. There's a lot. Hey, what are your thoughts or questions, Daryl?
Okay, I graduated from a rural school out around the Bay, if you want, in the late 70s. Top of my class, several scholarships to go to university, and did go there for a few years or stuff. But one of my strongest memories of high school was we used once or twice a month, whatever, we used to leave and go to a trade school, and we learned electronics and carpentry and stuff like that. But, I mean, it looked like my career was going to be more academic, but I enjoyed that stuff. My academic wasn't quite successful. I did my few years university, but then went on to a more hands-on trade. And I've traveled all over the world. I've worked in Norway, Denmark, Iceland, whatever like that. And the general level of knowledge of the common people there, I don't care if they were welders or pipe fitters or whatever like that, I could sit down with them and have a talk about quantum mechanics or world knowledge and literature or whatever like that. And that's just missing now in the education system. It's don't go watering things down, try and keep things simple somehow. I heard something about Finland. In Finland, there's a teacher or a cohort of teachers stays with the same student right from kindergarten right on to graduation. And they act as their mentor, teacher, social worker. I don't want to say surrogate parent or anything like that, but there's a much stronger teacher-student relationship there that seems to be prevalent in the Nordic countries. Is it worth studying how things are done in these affluent Nordic things? They seem to have a much better education system. I have a grandson who has dual citizenship with one of these countries. He's looking forward to going to university over there. And things are just getting so complicated there now. I don't know if anything is going to get done. Can we simplify things somehow? I mean, I raised three children. They went through school here. I saw the phonics program totally thrown out, and then this whole language program came in. And I don't know, the kids almost graduated. They were almost illiterate when they graduated. I have a large circle of friends that are teachers, and I hear from them. And, I mean, they got AI there now is helping write reports cards that are coming out. I'm sorry, I don't want AI teaching my kids. I want AI to do my dishes and clean my house and stuff like that.
Yeah, sign me up for that too, Daryl, please.
Yeah. I mean, don't overcomplicate things. And, yes, reports are great. They're fantastic or like that. But the simplest systems work the best. And I know it's hard to incorporate with that with so many voices there that need to be met, and God, yes, they all need to be met, but everything's not going to be met 100% everywhere. But there's got to be systems there that are available in these Nordic countries that seems to work, and just by witnessing the general levels of education there that are in the Nordic countries, they're far superior to ours. I mean, I graduated around the Bay, shall we say, in my grade 7 class. There was 42 kids. By the time we got to grade 11, there was 13 of us that graduated. Yes, something happened back there, and something is happening now. So, I don't know. I'm having trouble expressing myself.
No, I think you're expressing yourself real well. No, the points are, there's a lot of great life and learning context in there, from your graduating class to how you shifted your education to and relying back on your hands and where that brought you globally and what you saw. And then to point this with my two guests today, I think you're saying it real well, Daryl.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with people from Poland and Ukraine and Germany, and these are cooks and working on ships and stuff like that. And the level of common intelligence there is greater than what I've encountered in North America.
All right. Well, then let me put that to the guests for the conversation, and thanks so much for this call.
Yeah. Okay. Carry on. Thanks much.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
Daryl. Yeah. I always think it's kind of like a south of the border thing, but when I've traveled in other spots, there's folks I'll meet on like what you used to call like the expat circuit, right, of Westerners who felt really engaged with the world. And then sometimes you'll watch media come from other places south of the border, and you're like, I don't know how engaged folks are. Do you like either that or anything else Daryl's saying? And I know some of the references he made, you folks have been looking at that too. So I'll let you just respond to what Daryl was saying.
Okay. So thank you, Daryl, for your comments. I actually have done quite a bit of research in Finland and Norway and currently work in that area. So I'll just make a few comments, but Daryl's absolutely right. When we look at the relationship between teachers and classrooms and how they keep grades together for that teacher as a mentor, and also how it's a community space that really engages communities and partnerships. So teachers are not by themselves. They consider themselves to be part of that. The Finnish system's upheld as one of the, I guess, best education systems in the world. And, from what I can see, it's because they do very early intervention, which is something that is coming in with this accord. So it starts at the early years where the relationship's built with the parents, and understanding what the child's needs are, and those conversations take place all of the time. One of the things that Daryl pointed to is, pointed out about when you speak with people from other countries, it doesn't matter. It's not about their education level. It's about their ability and how engaged they are with their community, what their belief systems are, but also about what it is that they notice. And I really do believe that is something that is very much in the Nordic countries. This idea of conversation, and I talked about oracy earlier with you, I think just in the opening, probably not on air, but how we're seeing a real shift to that understanding about it's not about like just talking about the content and what you know. It's being able to express and be able to critically look at things, but to have a conversation about general life and what that means.
Yeah, and a world global curiosity, right? To engage, to get to that, to even wonder about whether you're talking about the Nordic countries or Asia or Australia or the Middle East, whatever, right? But if you're only living in a bubble where you're not curious, learning where you're not curious at all, that can lead to problems, right?
And for teachers in Finland, I mean, I looked at a number of classes, and their biggest concern is about engagement and who is talking and how they can speak with students. So, often you go in, it's like, well, what is the lesson plan today? Well, they have a plan, but part of that plan is we're going to have an engaged conversation. And they speak with students, and students look forward to being invited as being part of that.
Engaging conversations, right? Like looking people in the eye and talking and trying to reach into pulling out stuff from deep inside them, right? It's important. Go ahead.
So engagement is fundamental to what we will be recommending in the in the final report in terms of curriculum, teaching, learning, assessment. I'll just pick up on one area that our guest mentioned. He talked about the skilled trades. So we need to expand that in our schools. We were talking about one of the intents, I think, of the proposed junior high curriculum was to offer more choice, but I think that backfired. But we do have to consider that we need to offer students more choice and expand in certain areas, but not limit their choices, but give them choices. So we need more skilled trades opportunity for our junior high and high school kids. We need more work integrated placements so they can explore careers. We need more apprenticeships so they can have those hands-on real experiences.
Because and I know both of you know this from other shows I've done, that we have a skilled labor shortage. We're talking about, we're in a time of a transition of the economy and also looking at both, like whether it's the federal new leader or the opposition or the third party, everyone's talking about having to build more homes. And looking at the tariff threats, and all of this it's skilled labor, right? So I'm just echoing some of what you're saying for where, like down the pipeline, what that becomes. Yeah,
and I think everyone should have exposure to that in schools.
Yes, I mean,
right? Everyone.
I am useless, and it would be much better if I wasn't.
Yeah, we all need to be exposed to that and develop some basic skills in that area. Also, our guest mentioned AI, and I can understand his reticence maybe to adopt AI, but we can't dismiss it.
We have to learn about it to figure out.
Yeah, we have to look at its potential.
Yeah.
We have to exercise safety around the use of AI as well. So, we can't dismiss it. We have to look at it. Personally, I think it has a lot of potential to support individualized and personalized learning.
It's here and it's not going away.
It's not.
I agree. Going to be more of it.
Exactly.
Right. Go ahead.
I just sort of wanted to point out also about what we heard a lot about was around career planning. A lot from parents saying, why is it that my child is in the grade 11 or grade 12 and they're not really sure what they want to do? And I appreciate the fact that they're giving them the independence to make that decision. But the conversations that I've had with students is, I don't have enough information.
Yeah.
I really need to learn more. And, you know, Daryl, as you pointed out, in the Nordic countries, they actually start these conversations as early as when children are 10 and 11. Wow. And usually by the time that they get to be, you know, like maybe 12 or 13, they have a final interview where they sit with their mentoring teacher as well as their parents, and they talk about, what is your route forward? What is that you want? So, I mean, when we look at European systems, education systems across the Nordic area, one of the things that's really important is that they actually have a plan. And what does that plan look like? So many of their apprenticeships begin by the time that they're 18, 17 and 18 in school, and they're well underway. So, you know, that's a way in which they connect to the job market. Maybe that's an example that we need to look to as well.
Right, stuff to think about. And also for the, you know, I keep thinking about the final report and what would be in it for the plan to be considered for Newfoundland and Labrador in 10 years from now. Mike Keogh's on the line, Come from Paradise. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Adam. Hi. Hello to you.
Oh, you're breaking it. You're breaking it out. Let's say something else. Let's see if the line's working.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, thank you. Hello to you and your guests, and thanks to them for coming on. Adam, I'm calling in my role as the chair of a group called the Aging Workforce of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yep.
We used to be called Older Workers of Newfoundland and Labrador, but nobody wants to be old anymore. So we've renamed. We've been on the go since 2016. And have had a number of successes in partnerships and this type of thing. So for your guests, one of the, and I'll try to be very quick, I know you have other people probably, part of the aging workforce, Skills Canada calls them mid-career. That's what Skills Canada calls them, 50 and above. In a report done in 2019, there were 43,000 available workers, identified older workers, who needed to continue to work or wanted or would continue to work given the opportunity. And then looking at, and that was done for the Board of Trade, which the Board of Trade didn't follow up. The big barriers they have, first of all, for an aging worker, an older worker, there's literally no government support programs for them. All government support programs are targeted, and I'm not saying these are wrong, to immigration, to youth, and to targeted equity group, women in the workforce, things like that. By the way, the biggest part of our group that we identified who are hurting the most are those women who are now in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, who bounced off of that glass ceiling.
Yeah.
And now don't have enough money to be able to live on. And because of ageism, blatant ageism, can't get back in. I was really disappointed to hear that Memorial University, which your guests might be aware of, Memorial had started a program called CAL. I think it was Continuing Adult Learning, something or other. Nice acronym, whatever it was, and has walked away from it. So what really it was is you have all these grads out there from MUN, and if any of them want to get, skills enhancement and training to remain in the workforce, to join the workforce, they're not going to get it through MUN unless they're thrown in with some 20-year-old probably in a class. So these are problems, Adam, that, we face ageism, we face, a lack of opportunity, a lack of government support. The institutions, Memorial University and the private colleges and CONA are all structured to youth, and they're all structured, their support programs from government. Nothing is there for anybody who wants to retain their job or go back into the workforce. And there are thousands of them, and we're going to need every one of them.
Mike, I appreciate this, and we'll talk about it now. Thanks for the call, and thanks for putting this into the conversation. And I'll hear from you soon.
Thank you.
All
okay,
right.
Bye.
Mike Keogh there, part of Aging Workforce of NL. And folks, the lines are open. We're talking Education Accord, 10 years, a roadmap for education. in this province, where it's going, what needs to change, how does it need to be modernized. We want your thoughts or questions. I've got the co-chairs of the Education Accord here with me. Call us 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us 709-327-8206. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. And Karen, I know there's demographics stuff in the interim report because I read it, but I didn't write it, so you talk about it.
Okay. So this is a big part of what we'll be doing in the Accord, making calls to transformation around our aging population. And I'm in that category right now, right? About to retire. We have a very valuable resource here that I agree with Mike wholeheartedly, we are not utilizing. There are many reasons, people may retire, but there are many reasons that they want to return to the workforce. Sometimes it's out of need. Sometimes it's out of personal interest, personal development. Maybe they want a new challenge in life. But we have to provide those opportunities for them to do it.
We
right?
did a show not too long ago. I'm looking back at our Lazarenko on the show, because we did a show about switching careers later in life. Right? Good, she's nodding at me, which means I'm not wrong. And one of the guests who mentioned she, at one point, could barely turn on a computer and went to a certain education facility near here, learned how to program and does like website design and stuff now. Massive career change, and this was a later in life thing, right?
But like Mike said, there have to be opportunities.
Yes.
And it has to be, here's the buzzword, accessible. Right?
Yeah.
It has to be accessible. So we need to look at our rural schools and centers and how they can be hubs for learning for seniors and other people in our community. We do have to look at Memorial. And I know continuing education disappeared a number of years ago. If we look at universities across the country, there are a number of universities that actually have faculties devoted to continuous learning. We don't have that at MUM. There are programs and opportunities, but they're dispersed through the university. So the issue is it better to have a faculty of continuing learning or a division versus having them interspersed? And maybe they're not quite as prominent if we don't have them gathered together in one area. So I just want to reiterate that seniors are valuable to us, and we have to look at accessibility and ways of getting them connected and being able to pursue what they want to do.
Especially, I mean, we're so top-heavy demographically, right? Like
Yeah,
when you
we
look at
are.
the demographics
It
of
looks
this
like
province.
this.
Yeah.
I know your viewers can't see what I'm doing.
Inverted
right now.
triangle, right?
Yeah, there you go. Inverted triangle.
Yeah, and that could, because that, and all you have to do, and especially it is so more pronounced when you go to certain rural communities and you look around. But then you wonder, like, okay, if you like what Mike was saying about saving up, working your whole life, but then you're in your 60s, it's like, okay, glass ceiling or whatever else. I need something else, but then how do I learn and retrain or do something else?
And not just the traditional face-to-face. We have to look at blended and hybrid models to support seniors and their learning.
Yeah, I mean, it's a missed opportunity, I think, that we need to take advantage of and send that invitation out. So, Karen, you're right. I mean, looking at, in what ways can we actually include them as part of the workforce and invite them back.
And when we talk about Memorial University, John Harris, he's editor-in-chief of the Muse now, but back when he was executive director of external affairs for Memorial University Student Union, he said, "We don't need a year-long study to tell us the government has made education unaccessible for post-secondary students," pointing about the recent tuition freeze. Josh Lepofsky, with MUNFA, stepped away from the Accord. It said the interim report, as it pertains to post-secondary education, presents an inadequate and dismissive view of the fundamental changes facing our province's university system. These challenges include chronic underfunding and poor administrative governance, which negatively impacts students, faculty, and the broader public. We were just talking about later in life adult learning, and Memorial University came up, right? That's a funding thing. But then there's, from the student union to student activists to MUNFA here, all talking about funding issues. What are you looking at when it comes to that in the university? Also in a time when, for the federal liberal leader debate the other week, they all talked about, hey, we need to look at having free trade schools for skilled labor in this country, and CNA is part of this conversation, of course. But education funding for post-secondary, what are you looking at with it?
Well, we're not experts there.
No.
There is a lot of expertise that we've been consulting with. I guess I'll use the word sustainable. We do have to look at sustainable ways of funding the things we want to do, right? That won't leave us falling short. Sure, we recognize Memorial has been underfunded for a long time. I mean, we've felt the brunt of it as
you worked
faculty
there. Yeah,
members.
that's
We
what I mean.
work there.
Yeah,
We
you
are
worked there.
faculty. We've seen things cut. We've had to streamline. We've had to give up some of our resources. And then we all look at how is this affecting student learning? How is this affecting the level of support we can provide for our students? I mean, we talk about quality. Quality is an issue that we will be talking about in the final report. And we want to ensure there is quality. So I don't have an answer to that, but I know it has to be considered, and our politicians and our leaders have to look at Memorial and also look at our infrastructure. I mean, we in our report, we will talk about infrastructure, especially for new builds and the current builds. I mean, I shouldn't be walking down the hallway at Memorial and saying hello to a colleague, and she's got this big funnel coming down from her roof that's been leaking and there for months. I mean, that is not acceptable.
And the Auditor General just looked at that too, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is also, so I mean, the issue, the infrastructure deficit and the way that's been managed out in the public, and folks Google that too if you want to get your background on it. But this is what is being dealt with there, right? Plus calls for underfunding in education. And wondering how do we have things like moving away from a resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy and people power when people are talking about issues with funding of education. Right, which is beyond the scope of this conversation right now. But
It is, but it's nice to touch on it, and I'm glad that you brought it up because it is a concern. I mean, and it's something that is being looked at. This report does, consider what the challenges are currently, and looks at other reports that have been submitted. I mean, I will say that Memorial is very well funded compared to other universities in Canada, but we also are, I guess, a declining population as well, and we have a very, very large campus, along with other campuses. But I do think that what Karen has pointed out is that we cannot work in conditions, as have been pointed out, that are just not acceptable.
yeah. Two more callers on the line. 8 minutes left to the show. We'll get to both of you. Dan is on the line from Corner Brook. Hello. How's it going?
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Thoughts, questions?
Well, during my lifetime, I've taught kids from inner city Chicago, First Nations, all high school subjects, and I also spent 12 years running the outdoor education program here in Corner Brook with Rosemount National Park. And a couple of observations. First, kids need success very early in their learning career. It only takes a couple of no's or you can't do it, and a child was shut down for the rest of their learning life, and I've seen that. The other thing I've noticed is that when we talk about climate, we talk about creating a learning climate. Sometimes we talk about the school climate and the community climate, connections with the community, but also there's a classroom climate. I think the education system is the only system where we throw 40 people together on September the 4th and do nothing to build bonds between our students. And I had a wonderful opportunity to work with kids in Chicago and even here where we introduce them to team building and initiative activities, which are actually metaphors for working together. And you wouldn't believe what that does to the cohesive of the class, but also prevents the marginalization of a student that he will have to suffer for his whole career. And I've seen that also. The other observation is that if you can't read, you're behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
And my other observation is that our curriculum is so packed that kids can't breathe and teachers can't breathe. And I refer back to some of the systems that we've talked about already in Norway and so on, where the kids up to grade 8, spend most of their time reading, exploring the community, interacting with the community, learning traditional skills, doing mathematics, but not having to learn about histograms and bar graphs because they're not ready for it. And when they get to grade 8, they're ready to learn. And if you look at the open schools in Chicago back in the 60s, where kids didn't even touch mathematics till they were in grade 6, and they blew the other kids away because they were ready to learn. The whole idea of walking to a classroom and saying, "Sir, I hate mathematics," that did not exist. So really, I think our success in education is creating an environment where kids work together with each other, okay, but also have no barriers to learning. And that's just a couple of things I could probably talk about. But anyway.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. That's Dan calling from Corner Brook there. One more call, and I'll go back to my guest briefly. We've got Howard on the line. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thoughts for today's topic?
Yes, I grew up I did high school in Bonavista in the 70s,
Yeah.
and we went to the local vocational school one afternoon a week and were exposed to different trades and technical subjects. And I found that very helpful because if I sat at a drafting table and I knew what I wanted to do, and you were talking about younger people wondering what to do, there should be some. It'd be nice if there'd be programs like that again. I made a wonderful career out of it, and I'm having trouble retiring because they don't want me to retire. And but we're looking.
Yeah.
The company I work for is constantly looking for people.
Yeah.
And my daughter followed my footsteps, and she's all set for the rest of her life. So
There you go.
yeah, not everybody is meant to go to university.
No,
And-
that's true.
and not in a bad way. I've had it said to me that way. I'm a technical person, and that was it. And we're screaming out for them because there's lots of work.
Yeah, and you're pointing out the opportunity needs to be there, and people need to be able to understand what it is early on to make those decisions, right? And if it's not university, if it's a CNA, a trade type thing, those are different paths for folks. Howard, thanks for this. We only had a couple of minutes left of the show, so I'll put it all to my guests now. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so we had Dan calling there and Howard. So go to both of you. And any thoughts about choose your own adventure here? Any thoughts? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'll talk to Dan. Thanks, Dan, for calling in and talking about how important transitions are in building, communities within classrooms and really nurturing those relationships of students with teachers and, with each other students. So I think that's one thing that we have in this accord going forward is that we've looked at transitions and how do we need to support those. So, when your child enters into school, so parents are aware of what is going on, what your child will need, but also to enhance those friendships and those relationships that you can have with parents and those opportunities in between classes. Something simple as students having their class schedule before they leave at the end of the year and knowing, which courses they'll be in, or even knowing whose class they could possibly be in or who their classmates are. Those are things that are very simple that we can implement, very fast fixes that we need to look at. And I really was very appreciative of the comments that you made about being outdoors and really looking at when students are ready. So that exploration phase that students go through in Nordic countries, which is very true. They don't start learning to read until they're about 7. By that point, actually, they probably know how to read and they're actually showing those skills. So thinking about what kids actually need to build that. Karen?
Yeah, during the Accord engagement process, we visited some smaller schools in Newfoundland and Labrador, and some of them can be held up as models, whether it be in rural areas, remote areas, or in the metro area, for how we create a strong culture, vibrant culture of sharing and communication and collaboration in schools. And some of the key characteristics of these schools was the students knew each other very well.
Yeah.
They traveled through the grades in a cohort. They knew their teachers extremely well. The community was involved in the school. There were many partnerships amongst students, teachers, and community members. So there were many things that made this a robust, integrated, collaborative model for learning. And students, Dan mentioned, students need to feel success. Very true. Like one negative experience can throw them right off the horse. So if you have a community of collaboration and caring, this is far less likely to work. And just a response to Howard, we had mentioned earlier about having more skilled trades available in the schools, work placements, apprenticeships. And he's absolutely right. We have to have those options for students. Not everyone is headed to university.
And I just wanted to add in there, too, a lot of the conversations have been between the colleges, College of the North Atlantic, as well as the private colleges and the universities. So that, your journey may begin at the university or it may begin at the college, but they are working together to see how we can bring these together. So there can be that seamless sort of transition in between. So That is something we're really looking forward to. So no matter what you do, even if you don't finish something, you need to be able to have other opportunity to go forward. So we're very pleased about that.
You timed that out perfectly. The music's going to play now in a second. So at the end of this month, your homework is due. You're passing it in, right? Yes. And I'll be in touch with your people to do another show like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it for both of you.
Thanks, Evan.
Ann Burke,
Thank you, Al.
Karen Goodnough, co-chairs of the Education Accord. Folks, that is it for today's show. Thoughts for us, The Signal at cbc.ca. Call the Signal line and leave a message, 709-576-5260. We are out and about from the studio tomorrow all the way to the Johnson Geo Center, St. John's, for Green Career Expo at the Geo Center. We'll meet folks who talk about different green career paths and students to see what they think about those types of jobs. That is tomorrow on the show. Don't miss it.